Oh, okay.
There.
Well, I want to welcome everyone to this month's Cochrane noon meeting, and I want to thank Lisa Traditti for setting up our Zoom, and I'm so happy to have everybody out there on the internet with us. Lisa, do you have the names of anybody out there you can share with us?
I have Brian.
Welcome, Brian.
And I have an unnamed person.
And welcome, Anonymous. So great. And here in the room we have Marie and Trevor, and I'm Bob Dellavalle, and I'm going to be talking about how to prevent having a systematic review from being rejected by an editor. And this is a talk I gave at the Taiwanese General Medicine Evidence-Based Medicine Association back in August, and I didn't remove any of the Chinese characters because I thought they're beautiful. And in case we have any native Chinese speakers out there, you can see the translation. Welcome, Andre. We have one more person in the audience. And let me see, how do I advance the slides, Lisa?
You should be able to click enter.
Okay, there it goes. Thank you. So I just want to start by talking about my disclosures. I'm a consultant for two medication manufacturers. One is Altus Labs, which makes topical CBD products here in Colorado. And the other is Parapro, which makes a scabies therapeutic. So I'm a medical consultant for both of those companies. I won't be talking about anything that pertains to either of them specifically today. I also have an independent grant from Pfizer Pharmaceuticals to develop patient decision aids for psoriasis and acne and hidradenitis suppurativa. I have a grant from the NIH to look at skin cancer prevention among tattoo clients. And I also have a newly expired grant from the VA to expand our teledermatology. And I'm part of the National Health Service of the UK and a grant that supports our Cochrane skin endeavors. Welcome, Andre. I'm also the editor of UpToDate's Dermatology section. I'm a Cochrane skin editor, and I'm also on other editorial journals. Again, none of this pertains specifically to this talk, but it does give me a little bit of background, especially my work with Cochrane Skin, to say how we evaluate systematic reviews and work with systematic review authors to ensure that they produce a product which is going to be viable and worthwhile and accepted. So the first tip is to know what you are doing when you are writing a Cochrane systematic review. So what is a Cochrane systematic review? We have this video, which is I think a 3-minute video, which I'm not going to show you now, but I want to refer you to it. It talks about all the different steps and which are depicted here in what systematic review authors do. And we're currently in the middle of a plague of poor quality systematic reviews that are being published in a number of predatory journals, unfortunately. So the number of systematic reviews is going way up, and the quality of the overall quality is not going up. But one of the things that the Cochrane aspires to is to have the highest quality systematic reviews by ensuring that editors and authors go through all of these steps. So the first step is to identify important issues and determine the right questions. This is done increasingly through prioritization exercises that Cochrane editors do with authors and stakeholders, like academies of different branches of medicine, like the American Academy of Dermatology for my case. Once titles have been determined from a prioritization list and authors have applied for them, They will write a protocol for how they will do the review, and this is often the step which determines a higher quality. If you're looking at a systematic review and it hasn't published its protocol first of how they're going to do it, that means that they could change their methods without you knowing what they've changed. So by publishing the protocol, you know what people are doing before they do it. So it maps out what should be done, and if things aren't done in that protocol, then you have to say why you didn't do them. So after publishing the protocol and what's to be done, the next step is to search for the studies using a comprehensive search, and this is where we utilize our library science affiliates to make sure that we look at a number of databases and use all appropriate gray literature that we can. The next step is to sift through the studies to see which ones fit the inclusion criteria for the systematic review. Once you have the appropriate studies, usually randomized controlled trials for therapeutic interventions that are being summarized in a systematic review, then you want to extract the data from the studies, assess the quality of the studies. Not all studies are done with the same quality. Then combine the data if possible. Not all systematic reviewers combine their data in a meta-analysis. And then you want to discuss and conclude with the overall findings. So this produces the systematic review, which is then ready for dissemination out to policymakers and guideline creators. So we like systematic reviews because they summarize evidence in the least biased fashion. And that's why we put them at the top of the evidence pyramid. If they're done properly, Cochrane systematic reviews utilize extensive methodology to minimize bias, which makes them usually of higher quality than other systematic reviews. Puts them at the top of this pyramid. Okay, so the next tip is to know who your audience is when you're doing a systematic review. This was the audience when I arrived, a lot of Taiwanese residents when I gave this lecture the first time at the pre-dinner before the lecture. If you're writing a systematic review for the Cochrane, you're going to want to know a little bit about the Cochrane. So the Cochrane was founded in honor of Archie Cochrane, who believed that evidence should guide what we do in medicine, the same way that evidence guides what happens in the court of law. And the very first Cochrane meeting, annual meeting, occurred in 1992 at Oxford, 4 years after his death. Cochrane today has changed quite a bit from that first meeting of less than 100 experts from primarily the UK. Now Cochrane is still a mostly volunteer organization that is involved in knowledge creating, but it has more than 70,000 members and supporters around the world in more than 130 countries. And the primary great thing about the Cochrane, or what distinguishes it in terms of integrity, is it is fundamentally independent from the pharmaceutical industry, so it avoids spin and marketing on the results. So the Cochrane's mission is to provide evidence-informed decisions in the form of high-quality systematic reviews. And in this regard, the Cochrane is the most respected producer of systematic reviews. Now, because the systematic reviews are of such high quality, they usually take 4 to 5 years to produce, and they're very long and extensive. But there are more than 10,000 of them. And the strategy going forward is to continue to prioritize the most important topics for review in the field of medicine, because not everything can be, the resources don't exist to do this extensive work for every question in medicine. So we have to identify the most important questions to apply these resources and this energy to. And this is outlined in the strategy for 2020. So among the 4 goals that the Cochrane has outlined in the strategy are: 1, to produce evidence. And the impact factor for systematic reviews continues to climb. And another thing is to innovate in the realm of systematic reviews. Innovations include fast tracking or doing reviews quicker on smaller topics, creating living reviews, which add the evidence as it comes in. Within dermatology, the living review that we are currently working on is in psoriasis and biologics, which are very expensive medications. There are many new biologics coming out every month, many new studies of them, and we are working to incorporate the evidence as it comes out into the systematic review, making it living. That involves even more work than the usual ton of work that's being done on systematic review in the Cochrane. Doing rapid reviews, again, to speed things up. Performing network meta-analysis reviews, that allows us to compare the efficacy of different interventions which have not been directly compared in clinical trials by looking at the overall picture of all clinical trials. It's essentially a transitive law that if A has been compared to treatment B and B has been compared to treatment C, you therefore will know if treatment A is better or worse or equal to treatment C. That's the essential message behind a network meta-analysis. There are prognostic systematic reviews. These are systematic reviews that deal with prognosis instead of treatment or diagnosis. And lastly, another area of innovation is a systematic review that delves down into data at the individual patient level. And again, this is involving more work, but leads to less bias and greater reliability of the evidence. Another goal in the strategy is to make evidence accessible. The Cochrane is currently translating its work into many languages, 15 different languages. There are more than 26,000 abstracts of the Cochrane systematic reviews that are translated into 15 languages. There are 180 podcasts in 11 different languages. The Cochrane is also becoming more open access over time. The library is currently about 60% open access. And as time goes on, it's increasing its open access content about 1% a year. Cochrane has a very informative website for learning more about the Cochrane and systematic reviews and producing evidence. And also there is a Cochrane Wikipedia project, which we've talked about in this forum before. Some of our medical students here at the University of Colorado have inserted Cochrane references into chapters dealing with diseases in Wikipedia in order to provide better, less biased references for those chapters. And those chapters have been visited more than 10 million times since we've inserted those new references. So it's giving a whole new level of exposure to Cochrane evidence worldwide. And Cochrane is currently the most cited reference in Wikipedia, more than the New England Journal of Medicine or JAMA or other journals. The last 2 goals are to advocate for evidence and to be sustainable. So we want to draw in consumers and the public, practitioners, policymakers, healthcare managers, and researchers. Everybody has a role to play in advocating for the least biased evidence and for making these endeavors sustainable. There are also some modules for learning about the Cochrane more. These are available through the Cochrane Interactive Library. They're free to Cochrane authors, and I believe Cochrane supporters as well. I don't think our library has open access to them, but I'll refer no. Lisa is saying no, right? We don't have them yet. So you have to get access via working with the Cochrane. So I think most people in this room would have access, and out there on the internet for this group of people who are already working with the network. If you need access to this interactive learning tool and don't have it, please let me know and I'll help get you access to it. So my interactions with Cochrane Skin date back to about 2001 when I became involved with Cochrane Skin at the University of Nottingham. This is a picture of that institution, and Hal Williams was the first coordinating editor of that review group. And the current group is listed here. I'm one of the 2 coordinating editors, but the team that develops systematic reviews is funded by the National Health Service. It involves a managing editor, Laura, an assistant managing editor, Helen, they're on the bottom there, and then a statistician and another staff member who handles a lot of the finances and other details, websites. So that's Emma and Liz. The systematic review groups are then further organized into networks. There are about 50 different review groups. Cochrane Skin is one of them. And we fall into the musculoskeletal oral skin and sensory network. There are 7 other networks. Each of these networks has a senior editor that is checking on the work of the editors of the review groups. Our senior editor is Peter Tugwell at the University of Ottawa. And then above the senior editors is the editor-in-chief, Carla Suarez. So she's the second editor-in-chief of the Cochrane Library, newly appointed. And she's coming out with new ideas and a plan of action for the coming year currently. So stay tuned there. So another tip for getting a systematic review published is to ask the right question. Again, with prioritization being increasingly important, you want to ask an important question. And you want to be very highly motivated to answer it because these systematic reviews are not easy to perform. They require a lot of effort for many years. Within dermatology, well, this is just within all of medicine, there's a need to prioritize systematic review topics. There are many thousands of systematic reviews being performed every year, and there's been a 3-fold increase in the last decade. And Cochrane systematic reviews are comprising a smaller proportion of all systematic reviews. So the Cochrane proportion is in the red, it's going down there. The total number of systematic reviews is in the blue, it's going up. A lot of, when this has been examined, a lot of the systematic reviews in the literature have potentially misleading conclusions, and 2/3 of the systematic reviews have at least one overlapping review published within the same, within 3 years. So those are the citations for those findings. So you're having repetitive systematic reviews and ones which don't lead to the most compelling conclusions. And prioritization is designed to avoid those 2 problems. So in 2020, the strategy is to produce reviews more efficiently in the Cochrane and to maximize contributor support by not having repetitive reviews and to focus on important questions. Now, within our review group, we did a prioritization process for the first time in 2017. For that process, we took title suggestions from all stakeholders, and then the top 10 titles were ranked by the editors of the review group. And then the rankings were then determined and advertised to find the most qualified author groups. So this is an elaboration of all of the steps involved in that prioritization. It's just meant to say that it's a multi-step process involving many stakeholders to try to come up with the best topics. And not everybody is happy when you prioritize topics because that means you can't look at everything. We had some authors who got very angry with us, who had been contributors with the Cochrane for many years, but their topic wasn't selected as a priority topic, which meant that we couldn't support it with resources to the same degree that we had in the past. And they subsequently were disengaged with us. But for the most part, people are understanding why prioritization is increasingly important. Yes?
How often the group needs to decide prioritization?
So the prioritization happened for the first time in the year 2017, and it's going to happen again next year. So approximately every 3 years. And that prioritization process the first time came up with these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 titles for dermatology. Oops, I'm sorry, these are the, I think there are 7 titles on the next slide. These are the people who were involved in the prioritization. So professional societies like the American Academy of Dermatology, guideline development groups, healthcare commissioners, the members of the Cochrane Skin Group, consumers, consumer organizations, and disease-specific entities like the National Psoriasis Foundation, et cetera, were involved in helping to select the priority to suggest titles. Another source of information used for prioritization was the Global Burden of Disease Project, funded by Bill and Melinda Gates out of the University of Washington. And this project identifies the most burdensome diseases in dermatology. So you can see here that eczema and pruritus, urticaria, decubitus ulcers, viral diseases, psoriasis, non-melanoma skin cancer, cellulitis, impetigo, scabies, fungal diseases, molluscum contagiosum, acne, and alopecia areata were among the most burdensome individual diseases from that group. So that helped to make therapy questions regarding these diseases more likely to be prioritized. So the top 10 rankings by the editors, the diseases were ranked highest if the global burden of disease listed them as a top 15 condition, and they were not well represented in the Cochrane Skin Group reviews already. The final list was reviewed by the editorial base with respect to ongoing titles and the number of reviews that could be supported. So it was a 1 to 10 ranking. And these were the 7 priority titles that were determined in 2017. So treatments for severe drug reactions that can cause peeling of the skin from head to toe, like a severe burn. That was the highest priority title. Interventions for alopecia areata, a hair loss disease. Education programs for the primary prevention of skin cancer. Interventions for pruritus of unknown cause or itching of unknown cause. Network meta-analysis for topical eczema treatments and systemic eczema treatments. And then also interventions for folliculitis and boils. And that team actually came from Taiwan. So the Taiwanese evidence-based medicine group was very excited to be one of the 7 priority title teams. So the basic idea is to do less reviews over the future, but to make them higher priority.
Okay. What's the frequency with which you readdress a topic? As far as like I've heard the New England Journal does reviews every decade or so.
Yeah.
Being a 5-year process, I'd imagine it's not that tight. But.
Right. So the goal is to re-review every systematic review every 2 years now. That's the goal, and that's increasingly occurring. Once the first systematic review has been done, it's easier to update it because the search strategy is worked out. Usually there's an author team in place. But again, it's kind of a big ask to have a team say they're going to renew a systematic review every 2 years for the rest of their existence. So in that terms, if the data haven't been reviewed in a number of years, the review can be withdrawn from the Cochrane library because it's not up to date. Andre, do you have a question?
No.
Lisa?
And the next step is if a review is actually withdrawn from Cochrane, it can take 6 months or more for that to show up in PubMed as a withdrawn publication. So that's why you should, if you're double checking, you should always go to the Cochrane Library directly to check. If you think the review looks older or you suspect it may be out of date when you find it in PubMed.
Okay, thanks for that insight, Lisa, to not use PubMed, but to go directly to the library if you suspect a review might be old, because there's a 6-month lag between its being withdrawn from the library and that showing up in PubMed. So it's always important to ask the questions in the right form. This form is the PICO, so it talks about a question in terms of what population, what intervention, what are you comparing it to, and what is the outcome. So tip number 4 is to plan your systematic review and pre-register it. So there are a number of ways to pre-register a review. The most common are to use the database Prospero or Prisma P. And registration facilitates transparency, a priori methods, outcomes, and analysis. It allows people to determine if you changed anything from what you were planning.
I'm sorry, is this the protocol? Publish of the protocol?
This is the, yeah, this is the, yes, registration of the protocol.
Okay. And is it the same as publishing the protocol, like you said?
It can be, it doesn't have to be. You don't have to have a protocol in the Cochrane Library to register it in these databases. These databases are to register any systematic review, whether they're a Cochrane systematic review or not. So, but if you publish a protocol in the Cochrane Library, it's very easy to register it in these databases because a lot of the data fields that are required for the registration are the same.
And is there a specific format or guidelines for us to write the protocol?
Yeah, so these databases, I think we're going to jump into that next. So here's your checklist. You want to have all these things, and you don't have to write it down. You can go to the website. Each of these things has a website. So Prisma P is the 2015 checklist. And these are the recommended items to include in a systematic review protocol. So identify the report as a protocol of a systematic review. And if the protocol is for an update, let people know that. If it's registered, provide the registration number. So Prospero is a registration number. Prisma P is a checklist. Which is, I believe, another registration database. Have the contact information for authors, the contributions of each author. If the protocol was amended from a previous protocol, state that. What are the sources of support for the protocol? Who's the sponsor? And the role of the sponsor, the funder, in doing the protocol and the study. What's the rationale for doing the study? What are the objectives? What are the methods involved, including eligibility criteria for pulling in the studies? What information sources or databases are going to be used? What's the search strategy? The study records, how was the data managed? What was the selection process? What was the data collection process? What are the data items in particular that were collected? What were the outcomes? And including prioritization of the main and additional outcomes with the rationale. And then what was the risk of bias of individual studies? And lastly, what was the synthesis of all the data? So describe the plan. So this is a lot of details into how you're going to do your systematic review and how you're going to determine the confidence in the cumulative evidence. And this is all described before you do the systematic review. So that's a reporting guideline. This is more of a quality measure for systematic review, and it's the last tip I have, and that's to do your work well. So for determining the quality, I would recommend that you go to the AMSTAR 2 checklist. And this is a checklist, for example, that asks you, did the research question and inclusion criteria for the review include the components of the PICO, the question in the proper format? So what was the population, the intervention, comparative group, also the outcomes. Did the review authors explain their selection of study designs? Did the review authors use a comprehensive literature search strategy? Did the review authors perform study selection in duplicate? So this makes reviewing a systematic review quite easy. Pull this up and you're an expert reviewer if you can go through this checklist. Did the review authors provide a list of excluded studies and justify the exclusions? Did the review authors describe the included studies in adequate detail? Did the review authors use satisfactory techniques for assessing the risk of bias? Did the review authors report on the sources of funding for the studies included in the review? If the meta-analysis was performed, did the review authors use appropriate methods? Et cetera, et cetera. This is like your checklist for a surgery to assure quality, that nobody forgets an instrument in the stomach of a patient when you're doing an operation. Just make sure you didn't forget an instrument in doing your systematic review.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that the quality of the systematic reviews, the increase of the systematic reviews, but the quality is not so great because they're missing these steps.
Yeah, I think a lot of these tools were developed to check the quality and try to assure quality of systematic reviews more systematically. And that is because the number of systematic reviews is going up, but the quality, when you look at different things like, was the systematic review, was the protocol registered? And did they do what they said they were going to do? If you didn't register the protocol, then you don't know if they actually did what they did, or if they found something, didn't like it, and changed it, and just published the latter methods.
Is there like a similar checklist for checking the quality of, say, retrospective or prospective study that you want to include in your meta-analysis?
So there are checklists for just about everything these days. if you look, I'm not sure about that in particular one, but let's talk about it after the talk, and I can see if we can find something online. For clinical trials, there's the consort checklist to make sure that it reports all of the important parts of a randomized clinical trial. For epidemiological studies, there's another checklist. So let's take that up.
JAMA Users Guides has some checklists. They're not really checklists, they're just questions you should ask as you're reviewing different types of study design. And I'd have to look, but we do have access to the JAMA Users Guides online you have access to the library. All right. For retrospective and prospective, I'm pretty sure I have to look for that specifically.
All right, I'll come back to you.
Okay. I'll look.
Okay, so if you're attempting to do a Cochrane systematic review, first of all, remember that there aren't a lot of them, that they're hard to do, they take a long time, but if you engage a systematic review group and get a title, you're going to want to know what you're doing. You're going to want to know about Cochrane, which hopefully you do now, more than ever. You're going to want to ask the right questions, a question that's prioritized and in the proper PICO style. You're going to want to plan and pre-register your protocol using Prisma-P and Prospero. And then you want to do your work well, so you're going to want to check your the quality of all the steps you're doing with the AMSTAR 2 checklist. So these are great references for whether you're doing a Cochrane review or not. If you follow these steps, you're going to be much more likely to get your systematic review accepted to any journal that you're submitting it to than if you don't. So the Cochrane and this is about the 25th annual Cochrane, let's see, it was, yeah, 1992, and now we are in 2019, so it's getting up there in number of Cochrane colloquia. This year's colloquia is in Santiago. The theme is embracing diversity. We have at least 3 people from Colorado going. I'm going, Lisa Schilling, and Laura Wiley. And if anybody else is going, please let me know, because we're planning some activities there for our Cochrane US Colorado network and integrating it. We are also having a comparative effectiveness research meeting here for dermatology that's funded by the NIH, and it'll be the annual Cochrane Skin meeting. That'll be March 18th and 19th. That's immediately before the largest clinical dermatology meeting in the world, which is coming to Denver. It's the American Academy of Dermatology's annual meeting, which will be here the 20th to 24th. So if you have an interest in Cochrane Skin systematic reviews, that's the place to be on those dates, here in the Krugman Conference Room. And we are going to be fools and make a feast and allow other people to eat them in terms of doing that conference planning. So this is just a picture of my son and daughter and wife for her birthday, eating at Tavernetta downtown. Great food, good Italian food. And these are some of the collaborators that have been working with me on the Cochrane network. And I want to thank everybody in the room and out there on the internet for your attention, and I'll open it up to questions now. Is there anybody planning a Cochrane review? Well, like I said, you don't have to be doing a Cochrane review. It's a daunting task. I've done one of them, and it took 6 years, a long time ago. But any systematic review will benefit from going through the steps illustrated in this slide.
If you're supposed to be not Cochrane, just systematic analysis, so what current best way for registration of the study protocol? Should be registered in the Cochrane database, or are there any databases available for that?
Yeah.
And what strategy for now?
Yeah, so Andre's question is, what's the best strategy for registering a protocol of a systematic review that won't necessarily be a Cochrane systematic review? So if you're not intending to do a Cochrane systematic review, there's really not a lot of reason to go through the prioritization process and make a competitive bid showing how good your authorship team is to the Cochrane and engage with that review group if you're not intending on doing the Cochrane systematic review. So you can register your review with Prospero at any point before you do the review. And if you do engage with a Cochrane review group and it doesn't work out, which it sometimes doesn't for a number of reasons, you can always fall back on having a registered Cochrane protocol that then gets converted. It's registered in Prospero and it's published in a journal that's not the Cochrane library. So that's always a fallback position.
There is a practical question, because if physicians have very specific question and the answer to that, and rather than consistent with, I don't know how it may relate to the interest of Cochrane, but it definitely relate to the interest of practical clinicians. It makes sense to contact this Cochrane specific interest group to evaluate the value of this question, or how to better organize this process to make it more general.
Yeah, so you're in orthopedics, correct, Andre? So Cochrane bone, I think.
Orthopedics, it may be also, for example, cancer.
Cancer, yeah. So there's Cochrane cancer, there's Cochrane bone. Some of these topics might not fit neatly into one review group or another. So you're always free to talk to the editors in those review groups, and they're often very giving of their time and their input to advise you on whether or not the review group would be interested in the topic or not, and what steps you might want to go through, even if you're not planning on publishing it in the Cochrane Systematic Review. So I would probably encourage you to talk to the review group coordinating editors for Cochrane Bone and Cochrane Cancer.
Could you provide us contact information? Whom we can
Yeah, I will talk to you after the lecture, and we'll go online and look up the editors for those two groups online.
And I will just say, in addition to that, if any of you ever have questions about any of the groups in Cochrane, any of us in the library can help you with that, or you can go yourself. And if you go look at the Cochrane Library, there's an other section that lists the groups. And if you click on those links, it'll take you to who's involved in those groups, who their contact person is. And those people, they will respond to you. They'll tell you who you can contact for questions. I mean, it's a very friendly group. And so they're happy, as you always are, to talk about their work.
Great.
But if Bob isn't available, use Ask Us on the library's page and ask us how to get in touch with the Cochrane group you may be interested in.
So Lisa, I don't know if
We'll
you're
do that for you too.
getting picked up by the microphone, but Lisa Traditti is offering to help people get in touch with Cochrane review group leaders if they can't find them on the internet. Are there any questions from out there in the internet? No? Okay. So do we have any other questions from today in the room? If not, we'll break, and next meeting will be in November, and we will be giving you an update of everything that's happened at the Cochrane meeting in Santiago. So thanks for coming today. Thanks for being out there.
Stop the recording. Oh, you're doing it?
I'm doing it. I'm trying.
So scroll down on, there, see it says stop recording.